The auditorium echoed with the proud hum of patriotism. Flags lined the walls, uniforms were pressed to perfection, and families filled the seats, each face glowing with pride and anticipation. It was graduation day at the Westbrook Military Academy, one of the most prestigious officer training schools in the United States. Every cadet had marched through storms of discipline, sleepless nights, and brutal training. Today, they would stand shoulder to shoulder, not as students, but as commissioned officers. Among them stood Cadet Emma Wallace, composed, focused, and unreadable. Her dark brown eyes remained fixed forward, her posture faultless. She didn't speak, didn't fidget. She'd waited years for this moment, but there was something different about her. While her peers whispered nervously or scanned the crowd for their families, Emma's thoughts were elsewhere. She had made a decision, one that could change everything. Then, a loud voice announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and welcome General Harrison Kirkland." Applause thundered through the room. General Kirkland was a legend, 4 stars on his chest, a battlefield hero turned military policymaker. He walked in with commanding presence, his medals catching the light with every step. Behind him, 2 aides and a group of senior officers followed, each returning the salutes of proud cadets as they passed. One by one, the graduating class of 68 cadets saluted the general in perfect sync. It was automatic, drilled into them from day one. A sign of respect. A mark of unity. All except one. Emma Wallace stood motionless. Her arms remained by her side, her face calm but unflinching. She didn't salute. A sharp gasp rose from the second row. One cadet beside her glanced over in confusion, then looked away quickly, as though afraid her silence might be contagious. A few parents leaned forward, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. The general halted, mid-stride. His eyes locked onto Emma. The air grew heavy, thick with confusion. The moment stretched unnaturally long. Emma didn't blink, didn't move. The instructors in the front row stirred. Colonel Spencer, who had mentored Emma for the last 2 years, looked pale. He'd always said she had something rare, leadership, with a conscience, but even he hadn't expected this. General Kirkland took a deliberate step forward and stopped, just a few feet from Emma. The applause had faded. The audience sensed something more than just protocol had been disrupted. He didn't raise his voice, but his words sliced through the silence like a blade. "Cadet Wallace," he said, "do you care to explain why you've chosen not to salute your commanding officer?" Emma took a slow breath. Her heartbeat was thundering inside her chest, but she didn't let it show. This was the moment she had rehearsed in her mind for weeks, the moment she both feared and embraced. "Sir," she said clearly, loud enough for every person in the room to hear, "I will not salute a man who disregards human life." Her words hit like a bolt of lightning. A stunned hush fell over the crowd. Eyes widened. Someone in the back audibly muttered, "Did she just say that?" The general stared at her. The expression on his face didn't change, but his jaw clenched. Slightly. Emma continued, her voice steady. "Respect, in uniform or not, must be earned, not demanded by rank. I cannot salute someone whose leadership celebrates victory without conscience." The silence was no longer just awkward. It was electric. In that moment, the entire room realized this wasn't a mistake or a stunt. This was deliberate, personal, purposeful. Emma Wallace had not just refused a salute. She had declared war on the very system that shaped her. And no one, absolutely no one, knew what would happen next. Long before Emma Wallace ever wore a uniform, her life was shaped by one. Her earliest memories were not of birthday cakes or cartoons, but of boots by the door and a folded flag hanging above the fireplace. Her father, Captain Daniel Wallace, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. To Emma, he was larger than life, a man of honor, of quiet strength, of bedtime stories wrapped in military code. She remembered the way he held her after long deployments. His hands rough but warm. He called her Sergeant Sunshine, a nickname she wore like armor. Then came the knock on the door. Emma was 9 when 2 uniformed officers delivered the news. Her mother, Laura, stood silently as the flag was folded. Emma didn't cry that day. She didn't understand how someone so brave, so strong, could be gone just like that. It wasn't until the funeral, when the gun salute fired into the air, that the finality hit her. She screamed. Then silence. Her mother, once a combat medic, never remarried. She raised Emma alone, never shielding her from the truth. War isn't a movie, Laura would say. It's complicated. And sometimes it's wrong. That honesty shaped Emma. While most kids played house, she played field medic. She asked questions other children didn't. Why do wars start? Who decides what's right? Her teachers called her precocious. Her mother called her prepared. By the time she was 15, Emma knew she wanted to serve. Not for revenge, not for glory, but to protect. She joined her high school's junior ROTC, where she immediately stood out. She wasn't the strongest or fastest, but she was focused, tactical, and fiercely ethical. While others memorized orders, Emma challenged them. During a drill exercise, her instructor ordered a fake strike on a mock village. Emma paused. "Sir, there are civilians marked on this map." The instructor smirked. "It's about execution, Wallace, not ethics." She refused. He gave her a 0. She didn't care. That night, she went home and researched the Geneva Conventions. Her mother, watching from the kitchen table, said softly, "Your father would be proud." When she was accepted into Westbrook Military Academy, Emma didn't celebrate. She studied. She trained. She prepared herself for a system that demanded loyalty, but she promised herself she would never surrender her voice. Westbrook was brutal, but Emma thrived. She rose to squad leader in her first year, earned top marks in military strategy, and led humanitarian relief simulations with precision. But her reputation for asking the wrong questions also earned whispers. She wrote an essay titled Obedience versus Conscience in Modern Warfare. It went viral on campus and nearly got her suspended. Still, she stayed the course. She believed in the institution, but more than that, she believed it could be better. Everything changed 3 weeks before graduation. That's when she attended the private leadership seminar with General Kirkland. She had admired him for years. Read his books, studied his campaigns. But in person, he felt different, colder, detached. He spoke of warfare like a business. He dismissed discussions about civilian casualties as emotional distractions. He called a recent drone strike that killed 17 non-combatants a strategic inconvenience. Emma felt her stomach turn. When she raised her hand and challenged him, he cut her off. "War isn't a debate club," he said sharply. "People like you don't last long in command." The room chuckled. She didn't. That night, she walked the campus for hours. She thought about her father, about the folded flag, about the children who never get answers. And she made a decision. She wouldn't salute a man who saw lives as numbers. She would honor her oath, not just to a flag, but to its meaning, and she would stand alone, if she had to. The seminar room was sharply lit, silent except for the soft scratch of pens and the occasional cough. 40 cadets sat in perfect posture, facing the front where General Harrison Kirkland stood like a statue of war. A legend among officers. He was known for battlefield genius, decisive ruthlessness, and a resume stacked with classified victories. This was a man the Pentagon revered, and whose reputation cast long shadows. Emma Wallace sat in the third row. Her notebook was open, but blank. She'd come prepared to listen, but not to worship. General Kirkland's voice was deep and firm. "Leadership," he began, "is not about emotion. It's about control, strategy, power." He paced slowly, eyes scanning the room. "You will command lives, and in return, some will die. Your job is not to cry about it. Your job is to win." The room nodded in silent agreement. All except Emma. He spoke of drone warfare, of surgical strikes, of high value targets eliminated without boots on the ground. To him, it was efficient, clinical, bloodless on paper. At least. Then he said something that flipped a switch in Emma's brain. "In this line of work, collateral damage is not a failure. It's a cost of doing business." The sentence rang in her ears. Her hand went up slowly. Kirkland saw it and paused. "Cadet Wallace?" "Sir," she said carefully, "do you believe civilian casualties are acceptable if it gets results?" He tilted his head. "I believe in minimizing them. But hesitation kills more than any airstrike." She held his gaze. "So, no remorse?" A few cadets shifted uncomfortably. Kirkland chuckled. "Remorse? This isn't a therapy session, Wallace. It's war. You'll understand when you've seen real combat." Emma's fingers tightened around her pen. "Respectfully, sir, my father died in combat. I understand the cost." The room went dead quiet. The general's eyes narrowed, but he moved on. The moment passed, but not for Emma. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the exchange on loop. She didn't feel angry. She felt betrayed. She had been raised to believe military service meant protecting life, upholding ethics. Now, this war icon spoke as if honor were outdated. Her roommates told her to let it go. "It's just the way they talk," one said. "It's above our pay grade." But Emma couldn't shake the weight of it. She researched the general's career. He'd led drone campaigns overseas, including one that mistakenly hit a wedding in Yemen. 17 civilians dead, including children. The operation was labeled unfortunate. No accountability. No apology. To Emma, that wasn't strategy. That was moral failure with medals on top. She began writing in her journal, again something she hadn't done since her father's funeral. Page after page filled with thoughts. What it meant to obey orders, when silence becomes complicity, and why the rank on a shoulder should never outweigh the truth in your gut. And that's when she made her decision. It wasn't spontaneous or emotional. It was deliberate, calculated. She reviewed the Academy's code. Technically, saluting was tradition, not law. It was expected, not enforced. Refusing wouldn't be a criminal offense, but it would be a storm. Still, she felt at peace. Emma didn't hate the military. She loved it. She believed in its ideals. But loving something meant holding it accountable. And if that meant standing alone, then she would stand taller than ever before. The night before graduation, she laid out her uniform. With steady hands, she polished her shoes until they gleamed like glass. She knew what people would say: rebellious, arrogant, ungrateful. But she wasn't doing this to be seen. She was doing this because the one person she needed to salute her father wasn't there, and the man who would take his place didn't deserve the honor. The moment Emma spoke, the room transformed. The polished air of ceremony collapsed into raw tension. Her words, "I will not salute a man who disregards human life," still hung in the air, hovering like smoke. Time didn't move the same after that. It slowed, thickened, suffocated. Nobody knew how to react. No one dared to move. General Kirkland remained still. His jaw worked side to side, but he didn't blink. A lesser officer might have barked a command, demanded an apology, made an example out of her, but not him. He had commanded entire brigades, negotiated battlefield surrenders, buried comrades. And now, a single cadet barely 22 had just challenged. Him in front of hundreds. Colonel Spencer, Emma's longtime mentor, looked frozen in his seat. His mouth opened, then closed. The other staff members looked everywhere except at her. A few cadets stared at their boots. Others stole cautious glances at Emma's expression. Calm, determined, unapologetic, Kirkland stepped forward, his voice dropping an octave. "You're aware this action could jeopardize your commission, your career, and your future?" Emma nodded once. "Yes, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "And you still refuse to salute?" Another nod. "Yes, sir." The silence now became suffocating. Even Emma's mother in the crowd had her hand pressed against her mouth, trying to hold in a flood of emotions: pride, fear, disbelief. Kirkland glanced over at the commanding officers seated beside the stage. Their eyes were wide, uncertain. This was uncharted territory. Disobedience at a graduation? To a general? On camera? That's when the whispering began. At first, it was faint, a murmur rippling through the audience like wind across tall grass. Then came the phones. Parents and cadets lifted their devices discreetly, some filming, some messaging. What was happening wasn't just shocking, it was historic. Nobody had ever seen a cadet make a political, ethical, and moral stand live. In front of the nation's military elite, Kirkland finally broke eye contact and stepped back. "Very well," he said flatly. "Enter the room. Continue." But the ceremony couldn't just continue, not after that. Every speech felt smaller, every smile more forced. Even the national anthem felt quieter, like it too had absorbed the weight of what had just occurred. When the cadets stepped forward one by one to receive their commissions, Emma stood last in line. Some congratulated each other with handshakes and hugs. A few gave her hesitant nods. One cadet, Michael Tran, who had trained beside her during rescue ops, squeezed her shoulder gently as he passed. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. When her name was called, applause rang out, but it was different, not uniform. Some stood and clapped hard. Others held their hands tightly in their laps. A few high-ranking officers didn't clap at all. She walked across the stage with steady steps, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Kirkland wasn't at the podium. He had returned to his seat. The dean handed her the diploma, offering a tight-lipped smile. "Cadet Wallace," he said quietly, "your choices have consequences." Emma took the document and nodded. So does silence. As she left the stage, a loud voice from the back of the auditorium yelled, "That's leadership." It came from an elderly veteran in uniform, standing alone. The crowd gasped, then another clap, then another. And suddenly, a group of civilians began applauding, longer, louder, and freer than before. Emma didn't react. She didn't turn around. She just walked down the aisle, head high, feet firm, her father's name stitched over her heart. She had drawn her line in the sand. And now the entire country was watching what would happen next. By nightfall, the video had already gone viral. Someone in the audience had recorded the entire exchange, the silence, the confrontation, and Emma's exact words. Within hours, clips flooded social media. On TikTok, a caption read, "Cadet refuses to salute 4-star general. Listen to what she says." The views exploded. On Twitter, hashtags like #SaluteWithHonor, #Emma Wallace, and #Not Just Orders trended across the U.S. news outlets, scrambled for context. Some framed it as a protest, others as a national embarrassment. Conservative anchors accused Emma of disrespecting the flag. Progressive commentators called her a symbol of moral leadership. Veterans chimed in, some furious, others inspired. Retired General Alana Reyes tweeted, "I may not agree with how she did it, but I admire the courage. The military needs critical thinkers, not just rule followers." Emma, unaware of the growing storm, spent the night in her small dorm room packing. She had expected trouble, but not like this. She didn't even own social media. Her phone lit up with messages, some from classmates, others from strangers. There were insults, threats, and more than a few messages of heartfelt thanks. One message. Read, my brother was a civilian casualty in 2009. No one ever said it out loud until you. Thank you. At 7 a.m., she was summoned to the commandant's office. The mood was grave. Her file sat on the desk, thick with commendations and academic excellence, but the staff's expressions were colder than usual. Colonel Spencer stood silently in the corner, arms crossed. He didn't speak. Emma knew he was under pressure too. Major Ellison, head of cadet affairs, cleared his throat. Cadet Wallace, a disciplinary review board has been scheduled. We are investigating whether your actions violated Article 88 contempt. Toward officials. Do you understand? I do, sir. You may be removed from the commission process. Possibly expelled. This is not a small matter. Emma remained calm. Understood, sir. Do you have legal counsel? I don't need one. I meant what I said. The officers exchanged glances. Ellison hesitated, then added, the general has not pressed charges, but higher command wants an official review. Back in her room, Emma sat alone by her window, watching the wind carry leaves across the empty campus courtyard. She felt no panic. She had spoken her truth. But the weight of the machine she stood against was finally revealing its size. By afternoon, the Academy issued a statement. We support open dialogue, but also uphold the chain of command and respect for protocol. Cadet Wallace's actions are under review. That only intensified the fire online. Outside the gates of the Academy, protesters began to gather, some holding signs like, obedience without ethics is not leadership, and Cadet Wallace spoke. For all of us. Double quotes. News vans lined the entrance. Cameras waited. The Academy tightened security. Emma's name was now a household one. Late-night comedians mentioned her. Influencers debated her ethics. A political commentator on national television yelled, she'll ruin the military with this new age morality garbage. But for every voice that called her reckless, 10 others called her brave. That night, Emma's mother came to visit. She brought coffee and silence. The two sat in Emma's room quietly, letting the noise of the world fade outside. Laura finally said, I don't know if you're right, but I do know you're brave. Emma looked down. Do you think Dad would be ashamed? Lavra smiled gently. No, sweetheart. He died protecting the innocent. You honored him more than any salute ever could. They held each other for a long time. No more words were needed. The Academy was preparing its verdict. But outside those walls, a bigger conversation had begun. And Emma Wallace, for better or worse, had become its unwilling voice. 3 days later, Emma stood before the disciplinary review board. It wasn't a courtroom, but it felt like one. The Academy's panel of senior officers sat behind a long wooden table, uniforms immaculate, expressions stern. Behind Emma, a few observers sat quietly, faculty members, advisors, a legal aid the Academy insisted she accept. But she had already told them, I'll speak for myself. Colonel Spencer was there too, not as a judge, but as a silent presence. Emma didn't know if he supported her anymore, but she hoped the man who once praised her, conviction above comfort, would at least listen. Major Ellison opened the session. Cadet Wallace, this hearing will determine whether your refusal to salute General Kirkland constitutes a violation of Article 88 in the Academy's Code of Conduct. You may give an opening statement. Emma rose from her seat. She didn't carry papers or notes, just her truth. I joined this academy because I believe in service. I believe in sacrifice. And I believe that leadership must have a moral compass. What I did on graduation day wasn't out of pride or rebellion. It was because my conscience could not let me salute a man whose values contradict what I swore to protect. One officer leaned forward. You defied tradition. Do you understand how dangerous that precedent is? Emma nodded. I do. But tradition without integrity is just empty ritual. Another board member, a retired colonel, frowned. Are you saying you get to pick and choose who's worthy of respect? I'm saying respect should be earned, Emma answered, steady. If I blindly salute rank without considering character, then I'm no leader. I'm a follower in uniform. The room remained cold, unchanging. But something in the air shifted. The next 2 hours were grueling. They questioned her on military doctrine, the role of protocol, the risks of open defiance in times of war. They pressed her on her motive, her upbringing, her political views. But Emma never wavered. She never raised her voice. She never once apologized. She didn't need to, because even when surrounded by decorated officers and institutional weight, she knew she stood on solid ground. At one point, a younger commander on the panel asked, almost curiously, if your father had lived, do you think he would have supported what you did? Emma hesitated only a moment. My father taught me to speak when it matters, even if your voice shakes. So yes, I think he would have stood with me, even if he stood in uniform. The panel adjourned for deliberation. Emma returned to her dorm, alone. That evening stretched like eternity. She didn't eat. She didn't check her phone. She stared out the window as the sky turned from orange to dark blue, the silhouettes of protesters still visible beyond the gates. Some were veterans, some students, some people she'd never met, but who now believed she had stood for them. At midnight, her door finally knocked. Colonel Spencer stood there with an envelope in hand. Emma braced herself. He didn't speak. He handed it to her, nodded once, and left. She opened it slowly, her fingers cold. The decision read, Cadet Emma Wallace will graduate with honors. She will not be commissioned into active duty. Her heart pounded. She read it again. No dishonorable discharge, no black mark, but also no commission. The academy had walked a line. They didn't punish her, but they weren't willing to endorse her future in uniform either. She had passed her courses. She had earned her degree. But the military had closed its doors to her. Emma sat back, staring at the verdict. It was over, or maybe it had only just begun. When the Academy's decision became public, the reaction was immediate and explosive. News outlets rushed to cover the story. Headlines blared across newspapers and websites. Cadet denied commission for refusing to salute general. Military ethics versus tradition, the Emma Wallace dilemma. Young officers' defiance sparks national debate. On cable news, pundits argued fiercely. Conservative voices called the verdict just, praising discipline and chain of command. Others condemned the Academy, accusing it of silencing a courageous voice for morality. Emma became a household name overnight. Her face appeared on morning shows, podcasts, and magazines. Some offered her book deals. Others extended invitations to speak at universities, think tanks, and human rights organizations. One retired general penned an op-ed titled Bravery is more than saluting power, praising Emma's courage and calling for the military to embrace critical thinking alongside obedience. Meanwhile, her classmates had mixed reactions. Some privately thanked her for sparking conversation. Others distanced themselves, fearing the stigma. Emma herself remained focused. She attended the graduation ceremony one last time, accepting her diploma amid thunderous applause from supporters. Her mother, proud beyond words, wiped tears from her eyes. Despite the mixed verdict, Emma's message resonated far beyond Westbrook's walls. Veteran groups rallied behind her, launching discussions about the cost of obedience in modern warfare. Social media campaigns encouraged young officers to question orders that conflicted with their conscience. At the same time, some military officials quietly revised leadership training programs, integrating ethics discussions more deeply into curricula. Rumors circulated that General Kirkland altered parts of his public lectures after the incident, though he never addressed Emma's actions directly. Emma's choice not to salute that day became a symbol of challenge to a system balancing loyalty with morality. But the path forward wasn't easy. Denied a commission, Emma faced uncertainty. The military, the institution she loved, was closed to her. Yet opportunities emerged elsewhere. Human rights organizations reached out. Think tanks invited her to join ethical warfare panels. Universities offered fellowships. Emma's decision had cost her the uniform, but it gave her a platform. She chose to use it wisely. Her mission expanded beyond the academy. She vowed to protect civilian lives in conflict zones, to advocate for those caught in the crossfire of power and politics. Years later, Emma would lead a nonprofit dedicated to humanitarian aid and conflict resolution, her voice echoing through halls far removed from military barracks. Her story was taught in leadership courses nationwide, a reminder that true courage sometimes means standing alone. And though she never again wore the uniform, Emma Wallace never stopped serving. She had refused to salute a general and in doing so, had saluted humanity itself. Years passed, but Emma Wallace's story never faded. Though denied a commission, she never abandoned the ideals that led her to Westbrook Military Academy. Instead, she carved a new path, one where her voice could speak louder than medals, and her actions could protect lives beyond the battlefield. Emma founded Civilians First, a nonprofit dedicated to safeguarding innocent people caught in war zones. She traveled to conflict areas, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Africa, working alongside local communities to provide medical aid, education, and advocacy. Her work was dangerous. She witnessed horrors her father's generation fought against, and those new to modern war. Drones falling from the sky, displaced families fleeing bombed-out villages, children orphaned before they could walk. But Emma's resolve never wavered. She gave lectures worldwide, urging military leaders to rethink their strategies and remember the human cost behind every command. Her story was studied in military ethics classes, inspiring young officers to question, not just obey. She refused interviews that painted her as a rebel, insisting instead on conversations about accountability and compassion. Back home, her mother watched with quiet pride, knowing Emma had found a way to serve that honored her father's sacrifice better than any uniform could. Occasionally, Emma received letters from young soldiers, thanking her for courage to speak out, and from families who had lost loved ones. In war, those who finally felt seen. Her refusal to salute had become more than a moment. It was a movement. And yet, Emma remained humble. "I never wanted to be famous," she said once. "I only wanted to do what was right." Her story reminded the world that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silent stand that echoes longest. Emma Wallace, the cadet who wouldn't salute, became a symbol of conscience, integrity, and true service. The uniform was gone, but her mission endured, because sometimes the greatest battles are fought not with weapons, but with words and the strength to speak them.